we need to pause and breathe and ask ourselves the questions. Who does this life actually belong to? Who's been the narrator that's been driving this? Am I actually finding joy, not happiness, joy in my day? Do I feel satisfied? How does my body feel? Can I look back at my day and smile? So when we start to ask ourselves these questions, and if the answer is no on any of those, we know something needs to be disrupted. We know something needs to be changed.
Welcome back, everybody. In this episode, I'm interviewing Dr. Sonya Jensen. She is a naturopathic physician. She is an expert in women's hormones, emotions, and relationship. And today we're going to talk about all of them. This is for any woman who's wanting to better understand all the fluctuations of what's going on inside her body, no matter where you are, if you're having a cycle, if you're no longer having a cycle. And from this episode, you are going to become empowered to have a greater understanding of how incredible your body is as a woman. I'm so excited for you to enjoy this episode. Welcome, Dr. Sonya.
Oh, thank you. It's always so fun to have a conversation with you.
Yes, so excited for this. Sonya, you have empowered me in so many ways as a woman, and I'm really excited for my listeners to get to enjoy some of the stories that you share and tell. I think one of the greatest gifts that you've given me is an understanding of what's going on in my body in any time. You bring so much humor to the table as well, and so much realness in regards to how at different times in our lives, we can be obsessed with our partner. We can be bothered maybe by some of the things that are going on either with them or in other relationships, in work, in life, and how our hormones play a role in this. And I think, one of the beautiful things that women will walk away from this conversation with is just an understanding of like the season that these things come and go. And it's all a beautiful aspect of our fluctuating body and mind. And, I love your community that you've created for women as well. We'll make sure to link that below. But really, boiling this all down to, like I said at the beginning, our hormones, our emotions, and our relationships.
Yeah, I think that really just holds so much in our lives that we don't realize. And the lens that we're wearing every single day is connected to those things, the hormones, the emotions, and the relationships that we have. And our everyday decisions are based off of that as well. And so if we can get a deeper understanding of those three elements and how we operate in them and how they operate us, it can change everything. It can change how we're showing up in our everyday. It can change how we feel about ourselves, the choices that we're making, the future. So I love that we're having this conversation about this for your audience, because hopefully women walk away with some level of awareness about themselves and curiosity for more self-inquiry, which is so important.
Love that. Love it. Love it. And, Sonya and I have become super close. She's one of my girlfriends that I lean on. And so many of the conversations that we have privately in our audio messages and Voxers are things that, I want to share with the audience, not our private conversations, but the kinds of things that you've reminded me about the power and how beautiful our body is and how important certain things like stepping into a receivership role as a woman. It's one of the things I want to start with, rather than a doing role. And I know, a lot of the women that follow me and probably follow you, I think, we've been raised in or empowered in this lifetime that we can do it all. And I think in doing that, we're forgetting about how much our beingness is like, what an important role that plays in how we show up as women. And so one of the stories Sonya shared with me is about that and how we are literally here as women to receive. And I don't know for any women listening, if you've thought of having that moment of self-care for yourself and maybe felt guilty about it, or put your feet up to read a book and felt guilty about it, or have a hard time receiving compliments or gifts or any of those things. My goal with this story is for you to anchor yourself in how much that's an innate part of ourselves as females.
Yeah, I love starting here because it's actually one of the things that I'm really challenged with. Nick will give me a compliment and instantly I'm deflecting it, or I'm looking away, or I'm saying something negative to counteract that compliment. And it really took some time for me to realize that, I have a really difficult time receiving anything. Because the moment I do, or I feel worthy of that reception, guilt shows up, shame shows up, the old conditioning and beliefs that I'm not worthy of that, or I'm not supposed to be receiving, I'm supposed to be giving. And so when I started to become more aware of that, I really started to tap into like that connection between our body and how that impacts how we're receiving outside of ourselves. So one of the things that we've lost is lost the art of being, like you were saying, because we're so connected to the doing. We're trying to keep up in a very like male dominant world. Dominant in a way, I'm not saying that they're like dominating over us, but really because culturally we've been conditioned to operate like little men, and we're not little men. Our hormone cycles are different. They have a 24-hour cycle where ours is a monthly cycle, and we're constantly shifting and changing. And when you think about life itself, like we've been given this gift to move the generations forward together. And inside the body, when we're looking at our hormones and how the body is changing and how birthing even happens, in the beginning, none of that would happen if we didn't learn how to receive. So every month we release an egg, right? It's coming down the fallopian tube. And when you look at it microscopically, you see this egg just kind of sitting there for a little while. And it's sitting in its like beingness because getting ready to receive. So if there is sperm that enters the uterus and then goes into the fallopian tube, first of all, the sperm has to go through all these tests. So there's a bunch of them coming in, but only a few make it in front of that ovum. And while the egg is sitting there, it's secreting chemicals to discern, which sperm is going to live up to the standards that she needs him to be, depending on like background and strength and all these things. And really what happens in that moment is both have two different heartbeats or beats, if you call them. And the moment there's a merger, the only reason why there is a merger, because she now releases that chemical and allows some space for that merger to happen. She's not doing anything. She's just sitting there in reception, in receiving. And then they connect and become one. And now the beats have become one. Now there's one heartbeat there. And then they travel together into the uterus, into the wall to create this new home, to create this new life. And if we didn't understand, or our body didn't know how to receive, life wouldn't move forward. And yet in our everyday, we're so conflicted by this one simple thing: to just receive the support, receive the help, receive the gifts that are coming your way, instead of deflecting them away because we've been conditioned to think that that's what we're supposed to do.
Absolutely. I mean, Sonya, just as you're telling this, I'm reminded of my love for you. I think as humans, we're designed to be in these cultures and these communities where we sit around the fire or, whatever it is, and we're told stories because stories help us remember. They remember the lessons of who we are and why we do what we do. And we've lost that art and that beauty. And you are a storyteller. And I love this story. And I'm wondering to you, like, how does that story apply to our lives as women? Like, how has that impacted your life?
Yeah. So when you're stuck in a cycle, like when we're stuck in the cycle of doing, we're constantly thinking and having anxiety about the future. Like, what can I control? What can I do in this moment? What can I fill my time with? What can I distract myself with? How do I get ahead? So what we've done is really taken away this autonomy on how we make choices about success and what that means for us. It's taken away our voice. It's taken away our capacity to tune into our intuition and that whisper of our soul that constantly is there for us to support us and nurture us. And in that loss, in that disconnect in our physical body, we're sitting in a state of dis-ease. So when we're wearing that badge of busyness, what we're doing is we're creating more stress in our body. We're creating this environment where only our stress hormones can thrive, whereas our reproductive hormones like progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone that help us thrive have to take a back seat because it's helping us survive just that moment of stress, that moment of doing. And as we get stuck in that, we're so disconnected from ourselves, is we're now developing these walls. We're now not centered. We're now impatient. We're now irritated. We're now feeling like we're abandoning ourselves in every moment and having internal conflicts, which then externalize into our conflicts with our children, with our partners, with the job that we have. And what that's translating to is a lot of unhappiness. And the more we stay stuck in that state, the harder it is to see beyond all of the noise, to see beyond all of the conditioning that we've been living with and the narrator that we've been listening to in our minds. And so in the being, in the receiving, we can start to make more discernment. We can start to understand, like, okay, who's been guiding my story for all this time? What's the why behind putting my alarm on for 5 o'clock, drinking that coffee, getting out the door as fast as I can, making a schedule that's completely packed from morning to night, and then needing the wine in the night to wind down and just collapsing in bed, but then up at 3 a.m. with the to-do list and starting that day all over again. So really going back to the why helps us understand why it is that we're taking these actions.
Yeah. And I want to go deeper with that. Let's transition to that because I think, what's beautiful about this beginning story is like the power of receiving, and like you said, literally life wouldn't happen if those parts of our body didn't sit back and just wait and receive. And now I want to apply this to the woman perhaps listening that's like, okay, that's all great and beautiful, but like I'm running around. This is my life. My job's busy. I've got people I'm taking care of. Like you're describing my life, but what am I supposed to do? But I think first, let's go a little bit deeper into why are we overdoing? Like there's the reality of like, this is my schedule, right? I think everybody has like a lot on their plate, but let's go beyond that. Like what is the busyness perhaps even protecting us from, at least in our minds?
Well, I think you said it right there. It's protecting us from something. And so there's a few things that as humans need, right? We need to have that feeling of belonging. We need love in our lives, and we need to feel significant as well. And so often we are being driven or pushed by these needs to fulfill those needs. I have a really good friend who literally has 2 full-time jobs teaching in a university. And I looked at her one day, I'm like, what would happen if you stopped? Because, she's the mom that comes to pick up with her hair all over the place and looking, which still beautiful. But I just, paused one day with her and I just looked her in the eyes. I'm like, what would happen if you let go of one? And I know her backstory. I know the traumas she's been through. So I knew what the answer already was, but I was curious to see if she would be able to understand it. And without saying it, but saying it, it was, well, I would break, right? There'd be silence. I would tap into the brokenness that's there. So I think there's a lot of fear in slowing down because we don't know what's on the other side of that. We don't know what we're going to unravel if we just sit and get to know ourselves. We don't know what kind of grief that might show up because maybe there was a whole other life that we dreamt for us, but we're living something that's completely the opposite. So I think there's fear that stops us from being. But there's also this desire to fulfill this need to belong. Maybe in the household, education was the thing that got you the attention from your parents. And being perfect in your sports and getting those straight A's was what gave you the love that you needed. Maybe you were the youngest and didn't really have that voice that you needed. So you have to perform in order to be seen. So I think there's lots of stories that we carry into this doingness that we don't often get an opportunity or we're not taught to uncover so that we can accept those stories and then step into the being when it's safe to do so. Because when the safety isn't there, it's really hard to even shift those habits and stick with those new habits that are going to allow us to make those changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I definitely think you've hit on some things. It's like, it's the busyness distracts us from what's actually stuffed down. And
Mm-hmm.
so if someone's listening to this and they're like, yeah, okay, honestly, I've stuffed some stuff in my life, but like it's good. It's good down there and I'm functioning and I don't want to uncover it because what would happen? Like everything's fine on the outside. What would you say to that person?
For that person, yes, that is going to be the story, probably for some time until we're stopped in our tracks, until the body starts to speak, until all of a sudden there's a dis-ease state where we just can't ignore. And often when that happens, we start to ask the questions. And unfortunately, we're not taught to do that preventative searching unless something happens. The hope is with these conversations that we start to self-inquire before there's a breakdown, before there's a diagnosis, before something like that happens. But I have found usually there's something, some sort of inkling that something's not right in my body. Something needs to change because now I can't show up for my kids. Now I can't get up from my bed and have energy to go on the field trip, to watch them in their Christmas concert. I don't have the capacity to have patience for my husband. Now it's affecting my relationship. So often something is happening that's unraveling the external life, the story that was being told, that then brings us into this space of wanting to change. But for someone that maybe doesn't even have that awareness yet, because I think I've used this quote with you before too. It's like the fish are the last to understand that they're in the water or to see the water or feel the water because they're in it. And so when we're in that cycle, it's hard to know that why do I need to change anything when it's all working? Well, then we just need to pause. We talk about the power of the pause all the time. It's like we need to pause and breathe and ask ourselves the questions. Who does this life actually belong to? Who's been the narrator that's been driving this? Am I actually finding joy, not happiness, joy in my day? At the end of the day, you use this beautiful word when we were talking on my podcast. Do I feel satisfied at the end of the day? How does my body feel at the end of the day? Can I look back at my day and smile? So when we start to ask ourselves these questions, and if the answer is no on any of those, we know something needs to be disrupted. We know something needs to be changed. And often the women that I see, what brings them into my office and to sit in front of me is when their hormones are becoming chaotic. Their period might be irregular, or their PMS is really hindering their relationship and they're feeling anxious all the time and they're not able to sleep. Like there's all these things going on. They're in perimenopause now, not knowing who they are anymore. And then we start to unravel. But that unraveling really doesn't happen until our foundation in the physical is there.
Are you one of those women like me where you're going 100 miles an hour from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed? And maybe you have those moments throughout the day where you're like, I just need like a couple second brain break. So what ends up happening is if we get these few seconds throughout the day, we sit and we catch up on our emails, our social media, our meal planning, anything that is absolutely not this mental break that we need. I know for me, I needed to change this. And so I started incorporating books into my life. And it has made such an impact in me actually getting those mini breaks throughout the day that I created a whole online community around this concept. And I would love to have you in with me. In this community, we meet once a month online. I suggest an empowering, transformational nonfiction book. We read this together and we apply these concepts to our lives as busy women in order to up-level everything that we're doing. At the same time, we all show up vulnerable, authentic, and willing to support and stretch one another. I would love to see you in there with us. Click the link in the description, sign up today, and we'll invite you in for our next book. Got it. So what I'm hearing you say is in the patients you're seeing, they're coming in with symptoms of, PMS or hormonal fluctuations, challenges, difficult periods, horrible feelings, emotions during perimenopause or postmenopause.
Yeah, infertility, like all of the things, endometriosis, PCOS. Yeah.
And you're saying that these, in a lot of cases, are manifestations of the other part of the stuffing these things down. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. And there's like a real physicality to all of them. And what I've learned over the years is there's always a story behind them. So especially in our reproductive system. So there was a woman that I was helping and she had endometriosis. And after a few sessions, after we got the inflammation down, after, she was feeling a little bit better, started building a trusting relationship, I started to ask the questions. Like, when in your life did you not feel safe? Because with endometriosis, if you think about what's happening in the body, the lining of the uterus is leaving. It might be on the fallopian tube. It might be in the bowels. It might be in the nose. Like, it's just traveling around the body when it's not supposed to, almost trying to escape. So then I relay that question to her, like, when did you feel like you needed to escape, but you were stuck? And it turned out that she was raised in an abusive home, raised in a home where there was lots of drugs, raised in a home where there was a lot of instability. And then as we started to unravel that, it's like all of a sudden her body started to change. She's losing weight now. Her cycles become regular. She doesn't have the same pain that she had before. And we were doing all the physical things too to help support the physical frame so that the structure is there, the foundation is there. So as she's diving a little bit deeper, layer by layer, we're starting to get some freedom back. We're starting to understand the why. And then from there, she's able to make different choices in her life.
So beautiful. Again, with the stories. So it's so, I love the way you see the body. So you're literally looking at what's happening in the physiology and translating that into life, right? Like you said, you asked her, where did you feel like you needed to escape? So what would that story be? And maybe someone who has, I don't know, anything else like infertility or like difficult periods, anything. I would love to hear some more of those.
Yeah. So if you look at Chinese medicine, they've really mapped out the emotions and the different parts of our body. And the liver is one that tends to hold a lot of anger and resentment. And when, I look at my ancestry being Indo-Canadian, so South Asian, and seeing some of the oppression that a lot of women have had to face over generations, and also seeing and witnessing, like growing up, I've always been an observer. I'm not one that's in the crowd talking a lot. You don't see me like that. You kind of see me sitting back and observing and listening and just kind of noticing patterns, and started to really notice this pattern of, like my mom, my aunts, my grandma, seeing like as they age, all of a sudden they're finding their voice. As they age, there's a lot of resentment in that voice, and they've been carrying a lot of resentment in their bodies. And my mom, for example, at one point had a cyst that was 19 centimeters in diameter.
Wow.
Huge cyst. So when we think about what a cyst is on an ovary, it's tissue that didn't free itself from the follicle. Like it's stuck. It's something that's stuck. It's stuck energy. And then in Chinese medicine, they relate that to liver stagnation. There's a stuckness in the liver. There's not a lot of flow there. There's rigidity in that parts of us. And so when I reverse engineer just, women around me, I can see, I'm like, there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of holding in of the voice and not speaking one's truth. And then as I started to see that pattern, even in a lot of my patients that would come in with different levels of cysts, it was often related to them losing their power at some point, whether that was from somebody outside of them or internally them feeling like they couldn't show up in their powerful form because it wasn't safe to do so. So that's like one connection I've seen. And then with the thyroid, this is our communication center. So I've often seen women that are very giving. They're the women that we maybe are relying on, at 2 a.m. in the morning when I need something. I know that woman's going to be there for me because she's going to suppress the fact that she hasn't slept. She needs to sleep, can't be there for me, but she's going to show up for me. And these women I find often have some sort of thyroid challenge. There was actually a study that was done out of the 1,000 women that were studied. It was 900 and something. I can't remember the exact number right now, had some sort of physical or emotional abuse as a child.
Wow.
So now we're starting to make these connections between our reproductive system and the stories we've held as children. The same goes for fibroids. 66,000 women were followed over 10 years. And in that, they found most of the ones, actually all of the ones that had fibroids had some sort of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse as a child. So I don't know how we can separate these two, yes, again, there's a real physicality to what's going on. There's probably estrogen dominance. They're not detoxing well. Their digestive system probably isn't working well. There's all these things, but we can't ignore or compartmentalize this emotional aspect of ourselves that feeds what's going on there in the physical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at least in the US, other cultures are looking at treating the body or supporting the body in these ways. And then in the US, at least, I know you're in Canada, we spend more on our healthcare than any other country. And we're like last in line as far as our progress. And it's because that compartmentalization, right? Like when we go, any woman who's listening, if you've gone to get your thyroid checked, like they are solely looking at your thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
If you've gone to get your liver checked, they're solely looking at your liver. They're often not asking about what foods you're eating or not
Yep.
eating or your relationships or your stress, the things that, us alternative complementary physicians are looking at. It's
Mm-hmm.
the whole is better and is more than the sum of its parts. And
Yeah.
so that's so fascinating. And the stories behind the organs and the emotions. Are there books on that? Like, I know there's The Body Keeps the Score.
The
Is there
Body Keeps
anything
the
else?
Score is great. My next book is going to be on this. And there's a essay that was written in like the mid 1900s on emotions. I'll have to send it to you. I'm like gapping on, I'm perimenopausal. I'm gapping on the name. I'm not remembering the name
We'll
here,
link it
but there's
below. We'll get it.
right. Yeah. And there's a woman too, Dr. Edith. I can't remember her last name, but she was the first one in the 50s or 60s that was able to connect emotions to our immune system. The
Oh,
first one to show that when we're angry, we actually increase interleukin 6 or tumor necrosis factor. So when we're in that state of anger, we're releasing these like cytokines and like pro-inflammatory markers, which create inflammation in our body, which then translate into dis-ease. So there's definitely links there, but it is just now recently that they're starting to make the connection between our emotions and our reproductive system and how interconnected that is.
you always come from a place of empowerment. I think a lot of things in your platform are called empowering because that's
Mhm.
what you do. And I think because of the way that our country's medical system runs, it's very easy to see ourselves as victim to our bodies. Meaning, you hear things like, oh, my bad knee or my bad ankle or, this thing happened to me and my health is being impacted because of it, not realizing that we have the ability to control and impact everything that's happening in our body. And I think it's a choice because it also comes with responsibility, right?
Yes.
It comes with like asking yourself the question, why is it that I feel or am performing the way that I am? What am I not giving my body that it needs? Or what am I giving my body too much of that it doesn't?
And that's what we don't have time for, right? And that
Mm.
task can sometimes feel really daunting to ask those questions because what am I going to find on the other side? And do I have time and space and energy to actually navigate all of that? And that's why, so I've actually created this like hierarchy of healing for hormones where in the bottom, the foundation is the physical. It is to get that energy back, even though we know it's like this cyclical chicken and egg thing when it comes to our mental, emotional health and our physical health. But if we can just get a glimpse of what changing one thing in our day can do for our physical form, making that one choice, like you have your, morning, your magical mornings, like doing things like that to create space in our physical form to give us a little bit of energy. Now there's, a capacity to go into those deeper layers. Because without that, it just becomes overwhelming. And now we're feeding that overwhelming cycle that we're already stuck in.
Love that. I think it also having that information of how much impact this can create. And I want to ask you literally how you walk through your patients with this, but realizing in those moments as women where, okay, I need this 5-minute break of nothingness. I'm exhausted. I need to sit and put my feet up, but then guilting or shaming ourselves for doing it. Well, if we can start to reframe and create a little bit of leverage of like, this is literally for my health, or, my periods are awful. And like starting to do these things is literally going to have an impact on how that can change, that I'll no longer have to call out of work the day one of my period or the stuff going on with my thyroid. Like these small choices stack up and literally impact our health. So what I want to ask Sonya is when you ask a patient, the question as you're dealing with the physicality, but then you're asking the deeper questions, like say, what is it in your life that you're escaping from? Where do you go from there? So like for the woman listening to this that's curious, like how does she start to unpack that information? What tools, what support systems are there out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll give you an example of a patient that I'm working with right now. And, I see her every 2 weeks. And what I have noticed is we have the wisdom. We even have all the answers. It's kind of like when we're making a choice with food. We know what foods are going to make us feel bloated, and we know what foods are going to make us feel energetic. It's really the same with this energy and this emotional body as well. So when I start seeding the right questions, so every 2 weeks, her and I get together. And one of my first questions for her or assignments for her was to define what success means to her. What does health success, financial success, relationship success, growth, spiritual, like what does that mean for her? Because then we're still kind of in that logical brain, right? We're kind of mapping out what are the things that I want for myself in this life and really trying to come up with answers without the noise of the conditioning, but more so, okay, really sitting with yourself and asking that question. And then from there, we start to kind of reverse engineer. Okay, what are the blocks that aren't allowing me to maybe get to these places? So when we start to identify the blocks, then we then reverse engineer that too. Why are the blocks there? What was that first moment, probably as a child, where maybe you felt that neglect, or maybe you felt like you had to change your personality to fit in, or maybe you felt in order to be seen, you had to behave a certain way. Like we start to kind of go there. And the tools that I use are a lot of meditation, yoga, breath work. And then again, in that questioning piece, in that self-inquiry, what I noticed over several weeks of working with her, she starts giving me the answers. She starts
Mm.
telling me, well, today yoga didn't really work for me because my daughter got up. So I had to go snuggle with her for a little bit. But you reminded me once that, that flexibility piece is so important. So I started speaking to myself about flexibility. And then that kind of changed this idea around guilt. And then what I did was I did a little bit of yoga in the afternoon when I had time, when she was taking a nap. So you start to kind of see like the wisdom really starts to come up. And I know this is all the things that you teach too for women to like access that within them. It's like all we're really doing is bringing back remembrance. Here are some tools. Here are some things that have worked for me. And here are things that I've seen work for others. Let's see what fits into you. I call it, so mine would be like the Sonya way, or yours would be like the Melissa way. Like how do we find that for you? And more often than not, because us women are so stuck in our minds, in Ayurvedic medicine, we call it like like the Vata mind. We're kind of stuck in that doing, that busyness, like the buzziness. So yoga, movement, anything that we do with our body brings us back into our body. And then
Mm.
the more flexible we become in our body, the more connected we become to that body, the more connected and flexible we become in our minds. So then we're starting to, I know this is a really long answer to your question about the process, but there really is no one 5 steps that's going to fit every single person, but creating this idea around like asking questions about self-inquiry, about trying things and seeing if they work. That I found has been able to give women freedom to feel their way through all of it.
I love that because it's ultimately, we are our greatest teacher. We are the greatest guide. We have all the answers. And I think if you really think about, moments where maybe we've leaned on a girlfriend for advice or we've got that, that guru in our life, massage therapist, psychologist, whomever it is that like is one of our greatest supporters providing this wisdom, I'd be willing to venture that a lot of us, if we really hone in, they're just really good listeners
Mm-hmm.
and they create the space for us to figure it out. Or if we go to that woman for advice and there's like a few choices, we end up selecting the one that we would have, like, it resonates with us because it was our answer to begin with.
Yeah.
We just need that. It's like a gap between us knowing that we know that we know and us actually being able to access it. So what I'm hearing is a variety of ways to get there, which I love. It's not a one size fits all. But I think, I'm also hearing what's really, really important and powerful for us women in the buzz, in our do, is to simply lean into getting into our body, because that's where we can start to create that connection and clarity.
Yeah.
So how do you, for like the busy woman who maybe can't get to a yoga class or to the gym, is running from point A to B to Z, what are the micro moments and opportunities for getting into our body throughout the day?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a fancy yoga class or changing into fancy clothes. Doesn't have to do any of that. It could be a few seconds, a few minutes, a few moments. It could be you opening your eyes first thing in the morning and just placing your hands over your chest and just breathing. And then you're getting out of bed and doing a cat-cow and something that reminds you to come back here. So there's a mudra called the mudra of unshakable trust that I get a lot of women to do, where they're interlacing their fingers and just placing their hands over their chest. And this is just a reminder. So I always tell them, as soon as your mind is taking you away from the moment, just come back here. Find a moment. You might be making your kids lunches, start doing some calf raises. Your kids might be getting ready for school and they're not getting out the door and there's so much going on. Put on some music, start dancing. You're still moving your body. It doesn't have to be extravagant. And again, I know these are all things that you teach too. It is those micro moments that help you remember. And so maybe you get up, 5 minutes earlier. If you can't do that half an hour earlier or the hour earlier, you get up 5 minutes earlier and you shake your body. You jump up and down. You just come back here. So doing that, you start to create this new pattern in your brain and start to tell your brain that you're worthy of that time. You start to then unstick from that story of unworthiness to worthiness, because you start to see that, it doesn't take much to find me again. So the next time you do it, just in a few moments, just you thinking about it, just you thinking about that part of you that's going to be in your body brings you back. So the more you do it, the easier it is to get into that space really, really quickly.
Love it. How big of a part do you feel like self-worth plays a role in women accessing these kind of states for ourselves?
Oh, it's everything. I had one patient, I think I'm going to say 10 years ago now, and this really stuck with me. And this is when I really knew that this is the true work. The physical stuff is easy. Giving the hormones, doing the supplements, all of that can be really easy, but this is key. I had gone over her blood work and a few other tests and some things that come up for her, from like Hashimoto's to fibroids. Like, she had a few different things going on for her. And I'm going over, the list of things that we can do now and the possibilities and opportunities. And she looked at me straight in my eyes. I am not worth this kind of care that you are giving me. And I froze.
Bold of her to even know and recognize, to say that. Because I think so many people would feel that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many would feel it and not express it. And that's what
Right.
caught me off guard. And so I froze in that moment and didn't even know what to say. So I paused. And then I asked the question of, like, where does that story actually come from? The state she was in then, she's like, it's not a story, it's a fact right now. And I can't change anything. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve your care. And that shook me, because at that point, I don't think I hadn't really woken up the wisdom inside of me to see my worthiness. So if anything, she had reflected to me how I feel about myself. And so she's been such a great teacher for me over the years of how this lack of worthiness plays a role in every decision that we make, to the food choices that we're making. Because if we feel worthy, we're going to make food choices that nourish us, not deplete us, to the relationships that we have, to even what we're watching, to what we're reading. Every choice that we make comes from that place. So the more self-inquiry we have, the more we get to know ourselves, the more we start to clear away the noise, the more we start to fall in love with ourselves and realize that worthiness that doesn't really come from the outside world. It actually comes from within. But to get to that place, it's a pretty windy and windy road. And I feel like I'm still on it and there's often a tornado there or something that puts me back on that old road and I have to find my way back. And so when we can start to recognize though that could be a pattern, so even just that simple thought that could be a pattern that's driving my decisions, we can then seek the help that we need to step out of that unworthiness.
Love that. So it's not even about fixing it. It's like creating an awareness around it and just checking in and
Yeah.
naming it. I've loved watching you and your process. I think we have always just very openly talked about the struggles and challenges we're going through and just the commitment to doing the work and continuing to, show up as our best selves, as beautiful or as messy as that looks together. One of my favorite things I've seen you start to do this year is you've gotten back to dance. So Tell me about that. Like, what was the catalyst to get you there and how does it feel? How do you walk into your home after that class?
Oh, it feels amazing. I'm tired, but like elated, and just feels so good to be in my body in that way and to feel childlike again. And I'm doing my master's in Kathak, which is an Indian classical dance. And I've always danced my whole life, different forms, and have taught, but this was one that I really wanted to master. And it was one that I wasn't allowed to actually master. And so there was a lot of story around it. And when I finally kind of came to, I didn't even know what had happened that day, but all of a sudden there was a voice inside of me and it was just so clear and so loud. It was like, you need to find a teacher and this teacher needs to show you this dance. And this is the time. You're not waiting till tomorrow. Doesn't matter what happened yesterday. Like, now's the time. Like, it was a very, very clear voice because around that time I was feeling very confused about, where I'm going with my career, where I'm going with just like where life is, and kind of falling into the trap of like, I'm in my mid 40s. Am I where I'm supposed to be? Like, because that trap kind of comes back full circle sometimes. And through that, all of a sudden, this really clear voice came to me and said that. And I picked up the phone, found the teacher. And it's been such a gift to be in the seat of the student again and to receive this knowledge and to be in my body in such a different way and to learn and move and be playful again, that it's just brought so much joy. And then I'm better with the kids. I'm better with my husband. I'm doing something that brings out softness. And the interesting thing about this dance, it's very feminine. And when I first started, the first couple of weeks, literally getting yelled at by the teacher, this is not the dance that you did before. And so everything that I'm learning here is translating in my life too. This is not the pattern that you are going to play out anymore. This is a feminine dance, because the dances I used to do before were very masculine. And she's constantly reminding me, this is a feminine dance, be soft. And what's happened in that, I'm used to doing fast moves, like fast dances, doing everything fast. Like I learned quickly, everything's at a kind of hyper speed. But in order to master this dance, I had to slow down. So it was when I relaxed.
Hard. The slow is harder, right?
Yeah, I had to relax into it. I had to slow my thoughts down. I had to slow my body down to actually get every move, every nuanced action that my fingers and my eyes and everything was doing. And the only way to do that was to slow down. And so then when I translate that into everyday life, the speed at which we are doing life in, we miss so much. And it's easier often to operate in that. It's in the slowness, though, where the juiciness is, where you actually feel alive, where you feel the joy. So it's been such a gift in my life to help me translate the teachings that I'm learning there into everyday life too. And into my body, especially in perimenopause, I was, it's a bumpy ride and I do all the right things. And so along the bumpy ride, what also happens is we start to see and reflect on how we've been living and how we want this next 40 to 50% of our life to look. And so as I was doing that reflection, this is what showed up to me. It's like non-negotiable. Like I have to do something that feeds my soul.
So good for you. I'm so glad you made that brave decision. And clearly it's paying off. And it took, I imagine, some work to get to that place where you actually heard that voice and then were willing to listen and take that step. So great job. I know we need to wrap up. We're going to put some resources in the links. You have an incredible book. I mean, Sonya has come from a background of very intense personal struggle. You're not just out here saying these things. You've literally walked this path. And I know you share that in your past book. We'll link that below. I know you've got another book coming out in the next year or so. We'll be excited to hear about that. You'll come back on the podcast. But just lastly, as we wrap up, I know you've got incredible community that you're growing for women. So tell us about that and anything else that you want to tell my listeners before we sign off.
Yeah, thank you. So there's this community called the Her Community. And the goal really is to have women of all ages join this community so we can start learning from one another. We may not be able to sit together around a fire in a circle, but the virtual sitting where we get to share stories of our struggles, our challenges, but also our victories and everything in between and what we've learned. And then I have an online community on Instagram as well, where we also get to share ourselves and get the support and receive the help that we need.
I love that. Sonya, thank you so much for joining us. I always learn so much from you and your stories, and it's been such a pleasure. Love you, sister.
Thank you. Love you.
All right, guys, I hope you got as much out of that episode as I did. I always love and appreciate my time with Dr. Sonya. We'll make sure you have all the resources we discussed below. And if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and throw a like on it. And as always, if there is someone who popped into your mind during this episode that could benefit from this information, go ahead and click that share button and send it their way. Thank you.